Well, good morning or good afternoon. My name is Matt. I want to welcome everybody here to our TopLeft project management webinar. We haven't done one of these ones focusing on project management since I think September. So it's been a while. Some of you may have been to this webinar or some of the other ones about service management or things like that. So whether you've ever been to a TopLeft webinar or not, I want to welcome you here. Thanks for joining. My name is Matt, and I go by a VP of TopLeft here. So I've been working with TopLeft and the company that it came from. Let's say more about that in a minute. But been working with that company and associated companies for about 10 years, and I've done software development on our product and some sales and a lot of teaching and yeah, teaching our customers how to make best use of Kanban and improve practices in their MSP. And that's what you're here for today. So thanks again for joining. Today we're going to talk specifically about how to take back control of your project work in your MSP using Kanban. Specifically using methods that are, we try to keep it pretty simple because we know that there's a lot of people selling, sophisticated project management methods, and you don't have time to go away for a week or even a few days to go and learn some of these techniques. So you're here for about an hour. I'm going to try to give you all the biggest benefit here. So I hope that you can leave here today with an idea of what are the simple things that you can do to make your project management way better in your MSP. So first, let's do a little tech check. So find the chat in your Zoom and put on there. Tell us your name, the MSP you're with, and where you're located. And I'll read those out. Also be aware there is I will take questions at the end, so you can find the questions section of the webinar, and you can put those in anytime, and they'll be there when I get to those at the end. And I do have one announcement to make at the end. We are launching we're launching something. I'll tell you about it at the end, and it'll be could be very, very useful. If you've been trying to get your better practices for a while, but you just haven't been able to do it. That will be relevant to you. So stick around till the end, and I'll explain what we're launching to help with that. So let me find the chat here. All right, got a few of you have said who you're from. I know there's more of you there. We got Robert from Geospace in Fort Lauderdale. Robert Martinez from Polymer Technology in Texas. Amy from VC3, welcome. James from Australia. Kodo Technology, hey, we got you. If you stick around to the end, you'll see something from you, James. Appreciate that. I know there's more of you, so go and toss your name on there in the chat, and I'll mention you. Welcome, everybody. Jeremy from Vector Choice. Yolanda, thank you. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about us. Also, we got Jason from TSI in Colorado. Great. Okay, yeah. If you've been around TopLeft at all, you know that we came from an MSP. We didn't just kind of happen upon Kanban boards for MSPs as something to build and sell. Like we are an MSP, Kerkhoff Technologies, out of near Vancouver in Canada, and we've been 10 years at the MSP game, but we had some problems, especially with our project management, and things like just too many tickets started but not finished. We had like 400 open tickets with 10 technicians. Our projects weren't moving forward. We didn't know what was close to being complete. It took a long time to close out those tickets. Customers felt neglected and engineers felt overwhelmed. So not a good situation. And that was despite the fact that we were using ConnectWise as our PSA, so we had decent data, the projects and the tickets. We were using the project management module in there. But just because you use that doesn't mean that you're going to have good things are actually going to work. So you need the practices to go along with that. So we were aware of Kanban practices because we had some software development experience, and Kanban was fairly well known in the software development industry. And so we said, hey, can we adapt this to what we're doing in our MSP? And it turns out that you can. And so these are some of the, this is all going to be about some of the practices that we found and also the tools that we built to do this for us. So we're going to teach you the key functions of project management in an MSP. The Kanban way to do those functions that need to happen to deliver your projects successfully. So after that, if you want, I will show you the tools that we use now and that we offer to other MSPs to make it all fast and easy. And then we'll take questions, and I'll explain the new thing that we're announcing as a way to help you get on board with this and make adapt your practices to really get um, make 2021 the year where you really feel in control of your work. Okay. So on to Kanban. So what is it? You may have seen boards like this. This is kind of the simplest Kanban board that you can possibly have. You just got the columns that indicate the stages of the work. Things start out on the left side of the board, move towards the right side of the board as they kind of go through the pipeline of work. Here, to do, doing, and done. These little, these can be whatever you want. Little sticky notes or whatever on a wall, and they indicate, each of them indicates a unit of useful work. So as you can see, it's really simple. This is the most recognizable part of Kanban, but there's actually a lot more to the Kanban practice than just the Kanban boards. And it's actually not a new thing. It comes from about the 1940s out of Japan, and like Toyota automobile manufacturing. It's ideas having to do with reducing increasing efficiency and reducing waste and representing the work visually. So like I said, it's been widely adopted in software development for some time already, and it's becoming more well known in other industries, IT industries, and also other, like all sorts of industries. You may have heard of Trello. So back in, that was a few years ago now, 2017, Atlassian acquired Trello, which is a general purpose Kanban application for $425 million. So that's big money. So you can definitely see that it's becoming broadly popular. Recently, I guess this was about a year ago, Asana, a project management tool with Kanban built in, went public. So certainly there is growth, and Kanban is becoming well known in a variety of industries. Why would you do it? Well, Kanban has a few benefits, mainly that you can see the work in progress, which is basically stuff that you've already started, and then but you haven't finished it yet. So things that basically anything that's in your court to do. So it helps you see that and limit it, which is one of the key things. Being able to limit that is one of the key things that makes your team more responsive, and Kanban makes it easy. It can help you stop work from falling through the cracks. I think you all have the experience in your Autotask, ConnectWise, or whatever PSA you might be using, where you find a ticket and you're like, I didn't know that was still a ticket. Is that done? Is it not done? I don't know. Because the PSAs make that really, they do not make it easy to stay on top of the work in that way. You can improve the flow of your work by easily seeing the bottlenecks that exist in your team. Like, if one, your senior person has a quarter of the work in your 10-person team or something like that. So Kanban will make that visible. And with all those things, you can address things and make your team stop feeling overwhelmed, and use it as a really clear communication team in your communication tool for your team. And you can adopt it with small manageable changes. Right now, it's not, like I said, you don't got to go to a big course to learn how to do this and then train your team up. Take a long time to do that. So this webinar specifically is for MSP project managers, because we know that there certainly is a lot of material available about Kanban and agile methods, but it's a lot of it is either conceptual or it's geared to software development or operations, right? So not a lot specifically for MSPs. So even if you've done a lot of reading, you might feel like you can understand the ideas about Kanban, but you don't really know the next steps to use that in your MSP. So we're gonna today talk about basic steps day by day and week by week to keep everybody happy. Clients, your engineering team, sales, your boss, and certainly yourself. So I just want everybody to understand who this is for. It's for typical MSP stuff, 5 people working on 20 projects, even a large team, 25 people working on 100 projects at a large MSP. Now, if you're running um, huge projects, this is not going to be enough. You are going to need to go to that week-long course or whatever. Hopefully you've already done that, um, because this is not a complete methodology. It's not for 20 people working on one huge project. Okay, so that voids the warranty. So just be aware of that. But it's going to be useful for all of you here today. So let's get into it. This is the MSP project management cycle. Basically, it's a series of steps that you do over and over. First of all, you're going to identify and like the bulk of the webinar is getting into each of these items here. So first, you identify the projects. We're going to break down the work so that what are the details of each project. You're going to estimate that work. Finally, then you're going to assign it. And then finally, as a project manager, you kind of monitor that as the engineers are grinding away at that stuff that you laid out. Then you just monitor that and then you start over. So you can, letters there, IBEAM, you can remember that as an I-beam. Just an easy way to remember it. So like I said, it's a cycle. So how often do you do it if it's a cycle? There's a couple common choices. So you may have heard of Scrum. It's a fairly well-known, mostly it comes out of software development. There's no reason you can't use it at an MSP. So what that calls for is cycles that last, they call them a sprint, basically. So that sprint is going to have a fixed length. It's 1 week, 2 weeks, maybe. Those would be the common choices. And so the whole thing repeats every 1 to 2 weeks, whatever you decide is your sprint length. Kanban, and by the way, Scrum uses Kanban boards to visualize the work. Now, what is more specifically Kanban practices is just, you're kind of doing this cycle continuously. You don't decide on the length of a sprint. You're just kind of always going through the cycle. But basically, you just need to make sure that you are kind of, as a project manager, you're just kind of barely staying ahead of your engineers. You don't want your engineers to run out of work, but as a project manager, you don't want to get too far ahead of them, right? There's no point in having 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks of work perfectly planned out, because things are going to change, and then you will have planned out some work, and then your engineer it's going to change before your engineers get to it, and then all that work is wasted. So in Kanban, you kind of try to minimize that. You say just ahead of your engineers to make sure that you never waste any work. Scrum you might use that if you need a bit more predictability. Basically, the idea there is that you, as a project manager, you do some planning, and then you hand that over to the engineers, and you don't change things for them for the period of the sprint, so that they have some predictability there. Also, that'll be predictability for your customers as well. Kanban, you choose if you want more flexibility. Basically, you're in an environment where things are just always changing. It's really hard to even think 2 weeks ahead. If that's the case, which is the case at a lot of MSPs, then maybe you just choose Kanban and you get more flexibility out of that at the cost of not being able to say as confidently that you know exactly what's going to happen 2 weeks out. The benefit, the reason to do that is very frequently just real life. You don't know what's going to happen 2 weeks out. So that's we like Kanban here at our MSP. So getting into the identify part. Projects are anything driven primarily by you, by the MSP, and not by the client, right? So you don't kind of come into work and check the triage board to see what requests have come in overnight. Things that are driven by the customer. No, these are things that are driven by you. You figure out what the customer needs, and then you're the expert. You determine how you're going to deliver that stuff to the customer. So projects, they're going to have multiple tasks, multiple engineers working on that. Hopefully you got a clear scope and some sort of schedule agreement with the client. You do want to include internal projects. Maybe you're migrating to a new RMM solution or something like that. Basically anything that your project team is going to be working on, whether that's for customers or internal things, you need to be aware of all of that. So how do you actually do this in using a Kanban board? Well, we'll start out with what we call swim lanes. It's basically We will get to the columns part, the vertical part here, but actually at this stage, all you need is a swim lanes. You're just, for every project that you've identified, you make a horizontal lane, just put the name of the project on there, because at the next step, we're going to add some details there, the detail work for the project. So that's all you do for this step. Then we get to the breakdown part. Okay, so this is definitely a bit more work than just identifying the projects. So basically, you're going to make tickets for the project work. And that's what ConnectWise, well, we're not necessarily talking about ConnectWise or Autotask here, but if you are in ConnectWise, project tickets, if you are in Autotask, they call them tasks. It doesn't have to be though, because you can use just sticky notes on the wall if that's what you want to do. So how much do you need to break down? Here's what I would say. You don't need to plan, well, it depends on the size of the project. So if it's a small project, a single phase, go ahead and break it all down. If it's a big project though, first break it down into the key stages of that project, like the phases or the milestones that you're gonna deliver to the customer, and just do the first stage. Okay, um, you do want to plan that whole milestone, but you don't want to plan out the whole project, right? Because that's not agile. And like I had mentioned, it could be that you plan out the whole thing and then the requirements change or your resources change or whatever, and so some of this work that you did because you planned it out so far in advance, some of that work just you waste it because you got to go and change it again, right? So avoid that by only doing the next milestone at a time. So who is going to do this? Well, somebody, I mean, this is probably obvious, but sometimes it gets forgotten about. It needs to be somebody familiar with the tech issues at a detailed level. So it could be that your engineer does it. You need to kind of have probably, maybe a senior engineer who does some of this work for you. You're only responsible for ensuring it gets done. Now, if you're, many MSPs have project people doing project management work who have come out of being an engineer. Sometimes they even still do both, right? So if that's the case, then go ahead, you do it if you're the expert. And that's obviously that's a good situation. Um, the main thing is don't miss anything, right? Because that's how your scope always, that's how to blow up your projects. And have to go back and negotiate new money and stuff, right? So just really try to avoid missing anything here, and that's why you do it one phase at a time. Because if you're thinking in terms of one phase, it's a lot easier to avoid missing anything. So let's talk about the actual fields that you're going to use if you're making a ticket, because some people do a lot of work that's really not necessary. So these are fields that you're going to set when you're breaking down that work. If you're putting it into your PSA, okay, you're going to set the summary or title, obviously, the description and tasks. Obviously, you need a clear scope, and that's where that's going to go. You can go ahead and use the due date if there's a constraint from outside. Okay, so you're not going to set the due date just for the sake of managing the work. That's certainly I've seen people do that. It's not very agile, but you do want a place to record the fact. Maybe like it could just be. The contract says you're going to deliver it by a certain due date. Okay, so the due date. It could be that this work is related to a conference that's happening on a certain date. Well, then put the due date in there because that's a good use for that. You can set the priority, but really, realistically, at this stage, almost everything should just be a normal priority. In project terms, if you are using on any sort of elevated priority, then that means that you probably forgot about something and now you need to kind of catch up. So, which is not what you're doing at this stage of the work. And some people have like a lower priority for stuff that's just kind of nice to have, but in the real world, that stuff never gets done. I've never, I've never seen it get done. Nobody ever has any time left over at the end of the project, right? So you probably just set the normal priority. There are other fields that you can use. Go ahead and use set. I mean, like for example, type, subtype, and things like that. Go ahead and use those if you're actually going to make use of them, right? If you've got some reporting that you can drill into how much time you're spending on certain types of tickets or something like that. If you're not going to actually make use of them, then don't set them. You can go back and set them if you need to later. Okay. Here are fields that you don't want to set that are sometimes frequently used. Okay, so don't set the start date. Okay, if you set the start date, that is not agile. That is pushing work to the engineer, saying, I can see that it needs to start on this date. But like what I'm explaining is how to be able to manage your work to get all the same benefits of being able to deliver the work on time without having to push work to the engineers. Same thing with duration. Don't set that. You go ahead and we will set the budget or estimate, or some people do story points. We will do that, but we'll do it later. Okay, so don't do it at this phase, this part in the cycle. Same thing about assigning it to a member. Don't worry about that just yet. We will do that, but we'll do it later. I also want to talk about ticket size, because this is where a lot of MSPs can go wrong, and it really has a big impact on, it limits the visibility into like what's actually going on with this project. So you want a ticket to be a cohesive unit of value for the customer with minimal dependencies on other tickets. Okay, so what does that mean? Basically, you want it to be something that can be added or removed or changed that doesn't really depend on much else. So as an example, let's say that you have a project for a network upgrade at a certain office. You might think about having just one ticket that says, okay, like install the new office router. Okay, but that's actually too big, because within that you can pretty easily think of the discrete steps that make that up. So one is you got to order it, right? Okay, so that I would recommend you go at more that sort of level. You can order the router. Okay, then you're going to wait for a while till it comes. Then you're going to have a configuration. Probably you're configuring it in your office before you take it out there. So configuring the router, and then finally you schedule a time to replace it, and then you go out and do it at the time you agreed. Okay, so that's at least 3 different steps. So that's sort of the size that we're looking at. The benefit of that is that if you're looking at this on a Kanban board, then you can really easily see for this router installation project, where are all uh, the actual work that has to go into this? What stage is all that work at? So if you're getting hung up on one particular part, then you can see that as a project manager, and you can communicate that to your customer and so on. Okay, so we're looking kind of like that. So another way to think about it is like if you can, it's kind of ideal. I know this isn't always possible, but if you can set it out so that it's done by one technician in one sitting, okay, that's great if you can do that. um, if you know in advance the work requires a handoff, then split it up. Like if you can think, okay, I know that 2 different people have to do some of the work on this. Think about if you can actually make that 2 different tickets. Now, if you have kind of a process where work, the engineer says it's done, and then they put it into a review stage where some other engineer comes and takes a look at it, or manager looks at it or whatever, it says, okay, yes, I agree, this is done. That doesn't count. That's actually a good practice. There's multiple people working on that, but that is it's not the same thing. It's not like the actual work going into it. And if you're ever in doubt, err on the side of 2 small tickets. Okay, I've rarely seen that problem in the real world. We talk to a lot of MSPs. It's much more common to make tickets that are too big versus too small. So if you're unsure, go ahead and make it smaller. Okay, if it turns out that you're just doing a whole bunch of busy work because you made your tickets too small, okay, well then go fix it, or next time do it better. But that happens pretty rarely, and without exception, I should say almost without exception, make it the most 2 days of work. Anything more than 2 days, there's not enough visibility into that. You ought to be able to break that sort of ticket up into other tickets that are at the most 2 days of work. The only exception is stuff that's really experimental, like you don't even know if you're actually going to be able to do it successfully, right? And the customer understands that, and they've got a big budget for this because they want something that's nobody's ever done before, right? And you can't say how long it's going to take. If that's the case, then maybe go ahead and make it more than 2 days. Otherwise, 2 days. Talking about the scope, there's techniques to make sure that the scope is really clear for everybody. So, you know, you need that so that you and the engineers and the client all have the same understanding of when that ticket is done. Because the worst thing is getting to the end of a ticket, and you as a project manager, you look at what's actually been done, and you're like, okay, the engineer only did half of what we actually need for that ticket, or the engineer did double what we need for that ticket. Either of those is pretty bad. So we got to make sure that the scope is very clear. What we do for this is actually like we had kind of been having a discussion to say, okay, like when is this ticket done? Like so that we could lay out the exact things. And so now we just kind of have like we had said that so often in our conversations. Now we just sometimes like literally write that the description of the ticket is done when, and then kind of a checklist. It could be some if it's a small one, just one item. It could be maybe up to 10 items. Probably if it's more than that, you should make it 2 tickets. But you can do that right in the description of the ticket, or you can use, if you're using a PSA, you can use the checklist or the task functionality in that. Doesn't really matter. But that's something that we've found is useful for making things totally clear for everybody who sees that ticket. So how would you use Kanban for that? Well, basically, once you've identified these steps of the key steps to each project, then you write them on a sticky note, and you make a little column here on your whiteboard or your wall or whatever you're using, and so you put them in a column called backlog, and those are the things that you know that you need to do. Obviously, there's more that needs to be done to make these tickets actually ready for somebody to work. And those are the next couple of stages here in the project management cycle. But you know, this is already a good start. It's useful stuff for you and your engineering team and your customer to be able to see even just this. So next phase in the cycle is to estimate it. So here's where you try to make an educated guess about how much work is in each ticket so that you can prioritize them appropriately and then later assign them. So you if you're using the PSA, you know, there's a budget field for that, estimated hours, I think they call it in Autotask. You can also use story points. Story points is something you may have heard of. It has kind of comes out of the Scrum methodology. Basically, it is a way, instead of trying to estimate the number of hours that it's actually going to take, you measure the relative complexity of that point. So if you think of like all of the work that you could possibly do, you kind of slot that in, kind of rank it in order of like complexity. I think where does this ticket slot in? Like for other work, is it twice as complex as certain other work? Is it half as complex? Like and you give it a value. Some people use like Fibonacci sequence, you know, like 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on, just to kind of try to keep it simple. You know, you don't have to be super precise at this. Excuse me. The benefit of that is that with hours, it depends on the kind of the experience and knowledge level of the person who's actually doing it. That will change the number of hours that it takes. You know, your junior engineer is not going to do something as fast as a senior engineer. Story points has a benefit of it doesn't really matter who actually does that work. Everybody should be able to kind of estimate and say, hey, this particular ticket is about the same complexity as, you know, these other ones, and these other ones had a rating of 5 story points, for example. So we'll rate it as a 5. It doesn't matter who's actually going to do that work. You should be able to come out with roughly the same estimate there in story points. So that's the benefit. It's a bit more complicated. I'm not going to say anything more about that here. You can look at it more if you want to do that. Simpler is just to do hours. But it's useful to know about story points. So how much work do you estimate? Well, I would say you only need to do how much work you think is going to be done kind of soon, where you get to define what you mean by soon. It could be a couple of days of work, it could be a week, could be 2 weeks maybe at the most. But you know, if you're using Kanban, you just need to make sure that the engineers don't run out of work, keep those queues filled. For Scrum, then, you know, it would be, I guess it would be at least the next sprint's worth. So there, it would be 1 or maybe 2 weeks worth. So again, who's going to do this? It's going to be the somebody who could do the work. Could be the same people who broke down that work in the earlier step. Basically, they got to be familiar with the project and the technology, right? So that they can give an estimate on the scope there. So now, if the same people do it as the people who did the breakdown, why would it be separate? Um, just because it delays the estimation until after, hopefully, all the scope changes are done. So if you estimate things during the breakdown stage, it could turn out that you need to change those estimates later, because you're going to be doing some work, and maybe that work kind of educates the later work, and you'll see, oh, okay, based on what we know about that we've done already, now we need to come back and kind of make some changes here. Now, so if you just don't do that work before, then you haven't wasted it. If you do need to come and you're going to end up making changes later. So that's the reason that you don't do this at the very beginning, because you eliminate the potential of wasting that work. Now, again, if you end up with an estimate of 2 days or more, then you got to break that up. So go back, break that ticket up into at least 2 more tickets, and then go and estimate it. So how do we use Kanban here? Okay, so we are going to have we're going to add a couple new columns here. Remember, we started out with a backlog. The next columns are needs estimation and ready. Okay, so when you decide that work is coming up soon, for whatever your definition of soon is, then you pop it over here into needs estimation. Then, as either you as a project manager, or your engineer who's helping you with this, as they have a chance to look through this, then they will give it an estimate. Basically, you just write a number on the card and you pop it over here into ready, because now it's ready for an engineer to work on once you assign somebody. And assigning is actually the next phase here. So this is the trigger that's going to actually make that work happen. Now, one of the biggest blocks to the smooth flow of the work is bottlenecks in your team. So I kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier. Like, you might have a senior engineer. If your team is 10 people, you might have 1 or 2 senior engineers. Now, if they have way more than their share of the work, maybe they're 25% of the tickets have to go through them, that's going to be a problem. Okay. So, depending on whether, but it could just not be senior folks. It could be that only maybe one of your people is actually familiar with this customer at all, or this project or whatever. So if that can lead to bottlenecks too. So that restricts how fast your whole team can work if a lot of the work needs to go through 1 or 2 people instead of being able to spread it out evenly. Okay, so we want to, one consideration is that we want to minimize those bottlenecks as much as we can. A way to do that is to, if it's kind of an issue of the experience in your team, well, then you go and improve your training, sending out your folks to training, give them some certifications, so that instead of only having 1 person certified in a certain technology, you've got 2 or 3 or 4. If it's a problem because only 1 person knows anything about a certain project, well, then you got to improve your documentation so that other engineers can get up to speed really quickly, because they don't have to talk to the engineer who knows what's going on. They can, all they got to do is look at the documentation. So those are a couple of ways that you remove those constraints so that you can assign the work more uniformly in your team and remove those bottlenecks. So which tickets do we assign? Well, we look at the the approaching tasks, milestones, and the project due date to decide, okay, what are the really high priority tickets for us to be working on right now. Also, the overall importance of each project and the size of each project. Because MSPs have projects. You know how your customer thinks. You've got some customers that are just pretty cool, and if you get this work done in the next week, it's good. 2 weeks, whatever. Because it's a low priority to them. And then you've got other customers who are, breathing down your neck. And if you miss anything that you ever told them, they're going to remind you about that. Okay, so take into consideration that sort of stuff so you make all your customers happy. So who do you assign? Well, like I mentioned, constraints in terms of who is able to take that ticket based on the technology and experience, the client and project familiarity, and the current load. So, if you're looking at your busiest technician, try not to give them more work, try to give somebody else more work. And you even need to consider the availability. So things like non-project work, or maybe you don't have a dedicated project team. Maybe they're doing service work too. So consider that. Training sessions coming up. vacations, and so on. You need to consider. Now, I will mention that pretty typically you're going to be actually assigning these tickets to the engineers, but there's an advanced technique is that you put all of the work into a single, basically, kind of an imaginary queue of work, and you don't assign it. All you do as a project manager is you prioritize it. I'll show you this on your Kanban board. You just put the most important stuff at the top, and engineers, when they're ready to take new work, they go to the Kanban board, they take whatever is on the top, and they work that. Now, that's an advanced technique because it can only really be done effectively if you don't have any constraints in your team. Every engineer can take any ticket. Okay, so and that's realistically, that's kind of challenging. Not every MSP can do that. If you can, it's probably because you've put a lot of work into designing your team to be able to do that. Maybe, for example, by setting up tiers, maybe you have like a tier 1 project team, tier 2 project team, and within those tiers, everybody can do the same work. So um, if you've done that, then this might be a candidate for you, and that's the best because you don't need to worry about assigning work. So it's actually saves you work as a project manager. Um, this is something that actually comes a bit more into service work. And if you have been to one of our service webinars, then you will recognize that because we do talk a little bit more about that technique there. If you haven't been to one, I expect we'll do one next month. So keep your eyes open, and you can learn about that next month. So how do we use Kanban for this? Well, basically, we switch how we're displaying this work now. So recall that previously the swim lanes, the horizontal lanes there, they were by the project. These are not by the project. These are the names of our engineers now. So the swim lane has changed. Now we have swim lanes by the engineers. So all you do is you pick up one of these cards, sticky notes, whatever, move it from the project section to the member swim lane section, and you prioritize them there. Basically, what's the most important goes at the top, what's least important goes at the bottom, and that's what your engineers are going to work from. They're going to take from the top, work their way down to the bottom. Okay, so that's actually like all of the project kind of organization work. That's all you got to do, because now that brings us to the final phase of that project management cycle, and now we monitor the work. And this is actually uh, kind of where you spend the bulk of your time, actually, is in monitoring stuff. The engineers are kind of working through their stuff, doing their magic, taking new work from ready as they can finish other work. And so this is not something that you kind of you monitor it just once, and then you go straight into the next phase of the cycle, or like begin the cycle again. You kind of do this until you need to begin the cycle again, because maybe your engineers are running out of work, or for whatever reason you need to restart that cycle. So this is kind of where you stay when by default when you're not doing one of the other phases of the cycle. It shouldn't take too much time though. This isn't taking all of your time. This is just something you do in the morning, once a day, or when you need to. Basically, you're going to want to be managing by exception. Okay, so the things that are going well, engineers pick them up, they do it as expected, and they're done. They don't run into problems. You don't need to worry about those things. What you're looking for are those problems, so that you can come in and fix those things up as the project manager, make sure that they stay on track as much as possible. So here are some of the exceptions that you're going to monitor for. Looking at tickets that have a due date, monitor that for progress. Make sure that if it's a big ticket and it's due tomorrow, well, you would have wanted to know about that a couple days ago, so that you can make sure that that gets worked on. Things that have due dates way out in the future, you don't need to worry about that. You want to look at the hours that have been logged on a ticket versus whatever budget you set. As far as the estimate goes, you want to know when it exceeds the budget or when it's getting close. You want to look for tickets that have stayed a long time in that column. Now, long kind of depends on which column it's in. We'll get to that a little bit more in just a second when we show like which columns the engineers use as they're working, but that's definitely something you want to monitor for, so that you see those tickets that are just they're just staying there and they're not moving. You got to be aware of that. Long time without a time entry or a note in your PSA, that's a good indicator that something's getting forgotten about. And again, bottlenecks, if one of your engineers has way more work than their fair share, for whatever reason, you want to know about that, because that's going to slow you down. Things that also are escalated from the engineer. Hopefully, if the engineers notice a problem, then they'll bring that to you. So you deal with that sort of stuff too. Here are some ways that you can resolve some of those problems. Well, if sometimes you can reassign that, move that work to a new engineer, especially in the case of bottlenecks where somebody's too busy. Move some of that work over to somebody else. You can, same thing for bottlenecks, especially suspend new assignments for an engineer so they can work down, like if they have large work in progress, things that they've already started and are still in their court to do, don't assign them any more new work for a while. Sometimes you can split up a ticket. So if you're working on this, well, engineers working on this ticket, and it turns out that the estimate was optimistic, it's actually more work than you thought. Sometimes it helps to just kind of consider the work that you've done. Well, consider that ticket. Maybe even once you've started it, if it makes sense, you can split that ticket into 2 tickets, especially if kind of the main work is complete, but it's still waiting on, for some reason, you got to wait on a smaller part of that work. Sometimes just close off that ticket, pull that smaller part of the work out of that big ticket, make it into its own ticket, and then you can just consider that closed off, and then you can get that smaller part of the work, um, get that back into the queue, so that somebody will do it when it's actually ready to be done. Sometimes depending, things can happen. Sometimes the business case for some work is just gone. Sometimes the clients just ignore you, and then you got to cancel it, and that's totally reasonable as well. Don't feel afraid to do that. So here's how you use Kanban. Now, this is actually kind of what the engineers are going to be looking at. The engineers really don't need to worry about all those other columns that we've talked about up until this point. This is really what they're concerned with. And you will need to be aware of all of this stuff too, certainly, so you can monitor for these exceptions. So these are pretty common columns here. Ready, that's the stuff that is ready to start. Scheduled is for tickets where we know when they need to be done. For example, because you got to go on site to do that, and you schedule the time to do that with the customer. Basically, it happens in the future, and we know when. Ideally, you should have something in your calendar for this, or the engineer should have something in their calendar. Tickets that are waiting, that's for stuff where you're waiting on somebody outside. The next step is something outside of your team's responsibility, usually waiting on a customer or a vendor or something like that. Started, also called in progress. Those are the things that we've begun work on those, and they're in our court to do in our team. And QA and acceptance, those are things you may or may not have depending on how much process you want to have in your team. QA would be does the a second engineer looks at that ticket to say, okay, is it really done? Yes or no. Acceptance, that could be, if you have a specific process for your customer to say, yes, I agree this work is done, and then it goes to completed. So Q&A and acceptance are kind of extra credit. So as the project manager, you are watching all these things, like for those exceptions that I mentioned, ticket that has exceeded its budget, that might you might put a red tag on that or something, something that's coming close to its due date or coming close to its budget amount. You might put a yellow tag on that. So it has some attention. It's not a big problem yet, but it deserves a closer look. So you need to mark those things up so that everybody is focusing on those exceptions to address those as soon as possible. So notice that we're not putting any work into calendars, at least not for the purpose of managing it. So you have enough visibility and control just with the Kanban board to make sure that the tickets get done at a reasonable time, and you have visibility into the tickets that are not getting done as you expect, right? So we do not need to put them into calendars to tell them, to tell the engineer exactly, okay, at 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, you're doing this ticket. Okay, that's a lot of work, and it's not necessary because you still have control by ordering the tickets in the ready column. You can say what's most important to do, and by monitoring the Kanban board, you can see if there's problems with that. So we do not need to put that into the technicians' calendars to tell them exactly when to do things. Now, the exception, like I mentioned, is tickets that need to be coordinated with somebody because you're going on site or it's a scheduled outage or something like that. Don't worry about that. We still put those into calendars. So that's it. That kind of wraps it up here. To summarize, we identify the projects, we break them down into their tickets and tasks. We estimate that work, then we assign it to somebody, and then the engineers pick it up, and while they're working on it, we monitor it. So the engineers mentioned some of that, what they do. Basically, they work tickets starting at the furthest right side of the board, and then they work to the left. Okay, so that's known as a pull method. Basically, they decide when they have capacity to take on new work. That's what maintains low work in progress. So, if they have work that is in progress, they're going to work on that, close all those in progress things off. Maybe some of them might go to scheduled, some of them might go to waiting if we need some information from the customer. But as a project manager, you don't tell them when to start new work. You tell them what's most important, and they start it when they have capacity. And by focusing on the tickets that are on the right side of the board, that's the stuff that's already closest to being complete. And so that means that you deliver that value to the customer as soon as possible, because if something is 90% complete, you work on that before you work on something that's 50% complete. You may as well, and then the customer gets that value. So that's roughly how they work. And again, that's something that we speak to a bit more in the service webinars. When they are ready for new work, then they take from the top of their own ready column. So you would have gone in there and ranked those from top to bottom, and so they always take from the top. And also, engineers are keeping the records all up to date. They move the Kanban cards, they update the tickets in the PSA, they're entering their time, all the things that hopefully they are already doing. And they escalate, and they as you need them to, they participate in the work breakdown and the estimation. So that actually brings us to the end. Why don't you go into the chat and type in what was the most useful part of that teaching? Like, what is the one thing that you can change today that's going to make the biggest impact to your project team? What's going to make the best improvement? So go into the chat, type in the one thing that you thought that was most helpful. While you're doing that, I'll give you a couple of warnings, right? The PSAs are pretty weak at showing you this sort of actionable info, like which tickets are getting neglected. Things take a lot of clicks in the project module. Okay, in the PSAs, there's no real good visualization of the data to help you understand what's going on. You don't have ability to see multiple projects at once, and it really makes it hard to monitor for bottlenecks or things like neglected work. You may be here because you've recognized those sorts of problems. You might have thought about going to a third-party project management software. Certainly, people do that with good results, but it kind of can double your project management overhead sometimes, because now you're defining, you're working out of two systems, and your team's working out of two systems there. So you lose any benefits of integration in your PSA. So that's why we built a Kanban tool that plugs right in to ConnectWise and Autotask. So you get all the benefits. You get the visualization, you get the easy management. You can see multiple projects at once, both at the ticket level and the project level. You can easily identify the bottlenecks and the neglected work. It does just, you set your, it either does that totally automatically, or it gives you a chance to kind of set some thresholds to say, we need to see that a ticket doesn't stay in this column for more than 3 days. If it does, alert me to it. And you don't waste time entering your data twice in two different systems, because everything comes out of the data you already have in your PSA. So let me show you. If you haven't seen this before, this is a basic Kanban board here. These are project tickets. These are straight out of these ones are connected to ConnectWise. Autotask looks substantially the same. So this data here is synced with the PSA. All we need is the API account credentials. The columns, you can have it. This is totally customizable. Set it up however you want. You give them whatever names you want. any number of columns. And what you do is you map the statuses for your tickets into these columns. So that's how we know which column to put each ticket in, because we've mapped the statuses to these columns. And you can map more than one status to a column. So what you can do here is actually you can pick up and drag. You can drag left and right to put it and just drop it into a new column. Then we actually go out to your PSA and we set the status of that ticket to whatever has been mapped to that column. Okay, so we're just, two-way sync. If you make a change in your PSA, that ticket may move from one column to another. Same thing if you move the ticket here, we go out and we change the status there in your PSA. You can also drag up and down for prioritization. In the ready column, that's important to put the most important tickets at the top. And so you can do that. You just drag and drop up and down here, even within a column. Okay, so also you see, there's key. You save time because all the key data on the ticket is available here. You can see obviously the name and information, company and phase and who's assigned and whatnot. You can see what status it's in, budgets, how much time, when the last time entry was, and things like that. This view is actually a bit limited. What you would normally be doing in a project environment is you'd set it up to automatically use the project swim lanes or the resource swim lane, which I'll show you in just a second. So here is an example of a ticket aboard. Now we're showing the project swim lanes here. So all of these tickets in here are part of the this CRM implementation project. And so you can see multiple projects at once. So this is really useful from an MSP's perspective where you're always managing multiple projects. You don't have unlimited resources. So sometimes if you want to focus on one project, you got to focus a little bit less on another project. And now you can see that sort of thing in one view. So it really enables a lot of much more powerful use than what you can just get out of your PSA. This is an example of a board with swim lanes that are set to the assigned member. So actually we have a swim lane at the top here for tickets that aren't assigned to anybody, which is fine, in the backlog, needs estimation, and then ready. That might be a problem here in like scheduled waiting started. So you can make that sort of thing really visible to you if there's any problems there. And then we see the different swim lanes for the different members. So you can see at a glance who's working on what, who's got too much work, who's got work with a lot of like red on it here, because that would be a problem. So it makes it really easy to see how things are distributed in the team. Here, we can kind of make it useful for a single engineer as well. So here's an example of a project board. So each of these swim lanes represents a project, and all the tickets within it are part of that project. But we've applied a special filter. So these are actually all tickets that are assigned to one particular member. So a single technician could have a view like this, and they would get a really good view of what they're responsible for right now. This is sort of the opposite example. We're back to the engineers swim lanes, but now we're filtering it for one project. So now this is kind of, you've been zoomed in to a single project here, and you can see who are the members that are working on this project. To see maybe one person is focusing on this, but you still have somebody else who's doing some sort of secondary work. Is that stuff delayed? Is it all done? Things like that. So there's a lot of answers that you can get out of this tool that you can't get out of just ConnectWise or Autotask. You can, it helps you to identify the neglected work. So here's an example of, hang on. An example of how we tag the things that are possibly getting neglected, like a ticket that's been sitting in the in progress status for 5 days. Okay, that could be a problem. You want to know about that, so it's kind of alerting it here. This one is due in less than 2 days, so it has it's been tagged in kind of an orange color here. So engineers see this too, right? Engineers are going to be working out of Kanban, and hopefully they can even deal with it without your involvement. Okay, so it's very powerful in that way too, to make your job easier. Not only by just making your job easier, but by making the engineers, give them visibility too, so that there's less that you have to follow up on because they're just doing it themselves. We also track the overall project statuses. So here's an example of a board where these cards don't represent individual project tasks anymore. They represent the overall projects. So that, this is a company here. We got what is that, 9 projects, and you have projects that start out in a new status. You haven't done anything on those yet. Projects that are in progress, and then ones that are kind of done. You're just kind of monitoring them, see if anything needs some follow up, and finally completed stuff. So you can get a really easily get at a glance view of your whole project portfolio here. That works for both ConnectWise and Autotask. Same thing, or you can offer, you can use swim lanes for the project boards, where you can split them into things like, if you have gone and set an estimated start date on your projects, because maybe that's how you sold them, then you can see, week by week, like how many projects are we supposed to be starting this week, and is that a problem? If you found that somehow you had committed to starting 8 projects in one week, then you would see that really easily here, and you'd go back and you'd fix that when it's still out in the future and not, you haven't already passed that date. Same thing, it helps you identify the exceptions. Like, for example, if a project overall is over its budget, then it will help you see that. If the start date is coming up within a certain period of time, and you haven't started it yet, then it would highlight that for you. Also, this little icon here, that will zoom you. You can use that to actually zoom in to the tickets that belong to this project. So you can use the project boards and the ticket boards together to get a good view of your project portfolio, and then zoom in to the individual tickets for any one of those projects. Very, very convenient. This is the stuff that would take you hours to do in ConnectWise or Autotask. So it really helps you with your efficiency. You reduce the number of clicks, everything's right in front of you. You can share the project and service work together. That, at the moment, that's just for ConnectWise, not for the Autotask mode. You avoid miscommunications. Everyone can see the same data, so everybody knows what's going on. You can actually use a tool to assign and unassign members. So you can use it for the management. You can dispatch into their calendar. If it does need to be in somebody's calendar, you can do that from Kanban. You can view and enter the time and the notes. If it's right in front of the engineers, so they can do it throughout the day, so they'll actually do it. And you can actually customize the card appearance. Again, this is one thing that's just for ConnectWise for now, but you can customize how those cards look based on certain properties around those cards. So it can be pretty powerful. And also for ConnectWise, you can manage your sales opportunities. We will be adding that to the Autotask mode too in the not too distant future, and activities as well. So you can manage all sorts of things about your various workflows in your company. So you don't have to take my word for it. This is what a project manager out of Austin, Texas, Sarah at Clear Guidance, she said, it turned project management from staring at huge lists, things impossible to prioritize, into easily digestible, visually compelling information. She's no longer looking at a mountain of data and wondering how to break it up. It's already broken up for us in Kanban, made a flow of tickets a lot easier to see. And whereas she wasn't able to see the project side by side before, now that Kanban allows her to do that. Yeah, so you can get in touch and make those changes for your own MSP, and your boss will wonder what happened. Your customers will wonder what happened. Things aren't falling through the cracks anymore. So I will tell you more about how you can get started here in just a second. But here is the announcement that I wanted to say for something that we're launching right now. For anybody who's ever maybe tried to do some of this stuff before, or heard that it's maybe difficult to kind of get control of your work, we have launched, or I should say we are launching right now. We have had a couple people run through this program already. The Completed Ticket Challenge. Basically, it is a 3-week boot camp, okay, for finishing work before starting new work. This is a problem that we see everywhere. Almost, unless MSPs have taken very careful steps to avoid it, your MSP is probably going to suffer from this. You've got more tickets than you know what to do with because you have a tendency to start new tickets before you've finished other tickets. So this is kind of our motto for this program. It's better to finish tickets than to start tickets. And we teach you how to do this with, so this is how it kind of works. It's 3 weeks long, 4 times a week. You're going to get an email with some teaching from me in your inbox, video training to go along with it. Make sure you're perfectly clear on what you're supposed to do that day. just manageable stuff. Um, uh, every week you join a community call here on Zoom. You get to talk to anybody who else who is in the challenge, trying to reach the same goal. Join up with them, chat about that, ask questions, give suggestions, and so on. And we have an online community you can access to ask questions and tell people how it's going, and just get some support there while you're in this kind of boot camp. So it is for people who are serious. It's maybe 3 to 5 hours of work every week. So I don't want you to start this if it's not something that you can do. But if you're serious about knocking out this work, we'd love for you to join us. So this is something that if you join us, you might get, if you were to count the number of tickets that you have, it might look like this. This is actual results from somebody who was in this in December. So they had, 43 assigned tickets. So by the end of the third week, they were down from 43 down to about 25 assigned tickets. Tickets that had stalled, we're down from 34 down to 17 something. So this is real results. And a quote from somebody, one of the fellows who did it: "I wish the completed ticket challenge existed when we first adopted Kanban. It's all a Kanban ticket workflow onboarding you need to get started, and it's applicable to service and to project work." Okay, so just want you to be aware of that. That's $199. We're told that it's a steal at that price. So get in touch with us. Here is how you get in touch if you want to do that. topleft.team/schedule call. If you are already a TopLeft customer, you just gotta go to the shopping cart and buy it. Actually, so it's new on our website. Go to the topleft.team. At the top, there's completed ticket challenge. Click there. Go down on the bottom. It'll link you into the shopping cart. You can purchase that right there, and we'll get you on board starting Monday if that's what you want. We are basically going to start it every Monday. And if you are new to Kanban, go to topleft.team/schedule call, and we'll give you your own personalized demo of all this and answer all your questions. Now, if you're new and you want to sign up for an annual plan by anytime before February 11th, we actually have a little promo, a way to thank you for attending this webinar. 10% off the first year on annual plans with that promo code there. By the way, I will be sending out a link with the recording of this so that you'll be there. You'll have that. So that's 10% off annual. Is actually annual is already a better price than the monthly stuff. So that's 30% off the regular monthly price already. And we'll send you a copy of the Phoenix Project or Making Work Visible. Those are books we recommend to everybody. Very, very useful for improving practices in your MSP. So that's it, actually. That is everything that I wanted to share. Appreciate everybody who's stayed this long. We'd love to get you on board with the completed ticket challenge, with just starting out Kanban for the first time, whether that's service work or project work. Now find yourself in find the questions box, or you can just put that in the chat as well. And I will answer some questions, whether that's about the software itself or any of the practices here. So while I'm waiting for some of those questions to come in, I have some typical questions on that we sometimes hear from folks wondering about project stuff: how to handle multiple people updating status on a ticket. Okay, so I've heard that question asked before. So if you have multiple people assigned to a ticket and they're kind of fighting over it because maybe they're responsible for one part of that ticket and they're done that, so then they want to move it from like in progress to like waiting or done or something like that, but someone else is on that ticket and they're not done with their part, that should stay in progress or whatever it is. That is a indicator that ticket should be broken up into more than one ticket. Okay, so that's exactly what I had been saying before, is that ideally, I know this isn't always possible, but if you can, make it so that each ticket is structured so that it only requires one person to be assigned. Okay, so then you just kind of eliminate the root cause of what causes that problem. So if you see that, ticket engineers are kind of fighting over the status of a ticket, that's a good pointer to maybe restructuring that ticket. Got a question here from Jesus Shelby. Can you put work in progress limits on swim lanes? I'm glad that you asked that, because we have a feature that is so new. I haven't even announced it yet. What we have always supported, or at least for a very, very, very long time, is what we do have work in progress limits. So you can assign those per column. So you could say, for example, like in whatever the work that this particular Kanban board is for, you say maybe tickets that are in progress based on the size of our team. We don't want to have any more than 10 tickets in progress. And then you put that in the configuration, and the board will kind of turn red in a certain place when you're more over 10 tickets. Okay, so it gives you and your team a good, easy place to see if you're kind of over that limit that your team has agreed on. So okay, we've got to be really careful about finishing off some of this work before we start new work. Okay, so that's what we've always done up until last week. I think that was all that you could do. But now we do have an option. And by the way, I haven't told anybody about this, so here's your bonus for being at this, and now you're one of the first customers to know about it, unless you just happened across it in the application. We now have an option where you can change it so that the work in progress limits are apply to the individual swim lanes. Okay, so that is useful, especially for the member swim lanes. So I'll go back. Previously, what you could do is if you set a work in progress limit on a certain column, it applied to the board as a whole. Okay, so it didn't matter if you had like 3 people working on those tickets or 10 people working on those tickets. The number that you put in there applied to the board as a whole. Now, if you can just flick that one little switch, and now the number that you put in there applies to the individual swim lanes. So you can say, I want, if we are making a Kanban board that has the swim lane by member, then you can say the maximum number of tickets that any single member should have like in progress is 2. Ideally, it's kind of 1, but that's ideally speaking. So it's more realistic sometimes to say 2 or 3. What we see sometimes when customers come on board is they've got 10 or 15 tickets that are in progress for each technician. So I don't know, maybe set it to 10, and that's your goal for this week. Get it under 10. You can put 10 in there, and that means that each, if a swim lane has more than 10 tickets in it, just the one swim lane, then it will alert and indicate that that individual swim lane is over that work in progress limit. And then it kind of counts the number of swim lanes that you have and then applies that to the board as a whole at the very top. So yeah, to the answer is yes, you can put work in progress limits on the swim lanes now. Okay, I'll stick around another minute or so in case any other questions go in there. Again, thank you for joining us. Again, if you go into topleft.team/schedule call, then you can put a demo in our calendar. And we'll show you everything that you need to know, answer all your questions, and get you started. Again, if you're interested in the completed ticket challenge, just go to our, well, if you're looking at Kanban as a new tool, just schedule a demo. If you're an existing customer, go to our website, topleft.team, completed ticket challenges right at the top. Scroll down to the bottom, there's a link for you there, straight to the shopping cart, and we'll get you started. There is another question. WIP limit is a notification. Is that what you had said, or is it limit the tech from scheduling more? Okay, it's a notification in the application. So there's some area that is normally just gray. It counts the number of tickets that are in that column. If you go over that limit, it turns it red. So it makes it easy to see. It does not prevent you from going over that. And the main reason for that is that tickets can move into the column based on changes that come in from your PSA, right? So if a technician is already at the limit, and they see a ticket that's in like the ready status, and they decide they want to start it even though they're already at their limit, they they could just even if we prevented that in the Kanban application, they could still go into your PSA and change the status of that ready ticket, move that over to in progress, and then we'd still have to display it in that column in Kanban. So it would, we're not effectively able to prevent that from happening because of the way that we integrate with the PSA. So the answer is no, we don't actively limit it, but we do make it pretty clear when someone has exceeded that limit. Okay, well, it looks like that's all of the questions that we have right now. Again, I will just wait another minute if I see any more questions there. But if not, thank you everyone for attending. Hope you have a great rest of your Thursday, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.